We will be especially pleased next to recognize, I think legendary is probably the right word to use, one of the nation's top disc jockeys ever. He's a 1973 graduate of WUVA and a consistent supporter of our little media company. And I want to thank in advance Alan Curlin, who took a bunch of these pictures that you will see in a second of Dick Bartley. And I want to introduce a friend of his and someone who knows much more about Dick Bartley than I ever will, the very knowledgeable Steve Taylor.
Well, it's easy enough. Dick Bartley is a retired purveyor of radio rock and roll. You'll hear from him shortly. Once upon a time, to share a song meant to sing together. Edison devised a system to play recorded music. Soon there was radio to broadcast the musical recordings for mass audiences, and there were volunteers to announce song titles, artist names, and occasional critical commentary. Climbing to the top of the charts, the top 10 of the nation, oldies but goodies. At this university that started 75 years ago, Martin Haydn and other students established their own radio station, as was the custom for such operations to identify themselves on the air by saying 4 letters, and east of the Mississippi, the first letter was W. WUVA was born. The people who spun the discs were called disc jockeys. One of their particular talents was to sit alone in a sterile, glass-enclosed cage and sound like they were at the best party anybody ever enjoyed. WUVA generated dozens and dozens of us. Some, not many, continued to follow this strange calling after the university. Most of us broadcasted in small and medium markets, which is to say in relative obscurity. You may not know, but that's a suburb of Toledo, relative obscurity. But one man went from WUVA to 2 other Charlottesville stations, not better ones, but at least willing to pay announcers, and directly from this city to Chicago and its much larger audience. And from there to a national audience, doing a show that remained on the air Saturday nights for decades. Dick Bartley, the class of 1974.
Greetings, fellow WUVA people, past and present. Great to be with you this evening, celebrating WUVA 75. During my years at WUVA, 1969 to 1973, WUVA provided me with exposure to basic broadcast principles, skills, and standards, and a platform on which to learn, experiment, and socialize. That WUVA experience confirmed in me a passion that drove my radio career for the next 50 years. The tools, the technology, and the delivery systems have certainly changed, but the mission remains essentially the same: to educate, train, and inspire broadcast communicators. From WUVA, I went to WCHV, then WELK in Charlottesville. After 2 years playing top 40 at WELK, I moved to Chicago to do soft rock at WBBM-FM, the mellow sound of Chicago. A jump from CBS to RKO took me to WFYR in Chicago, at that time the #1 adult contemporary station in the Windy City. During my years in Chicago, it was a pleasure to welcome 3 of my all-time radio idols, Dick Clark, Casey Kasem, and Wolfman Jack, individually at different times, to my radio program. At WFYR, I launched a weekend specialty show called Saturday Night Oldies in the spring of 1980. The show generated huge numbers in Chicago and was picked up the following year for national distribution by the RKO radio network. The retitled Solid Gold Saturday Night was the first of many network and syndicated programs to follow over the years, during stints with Westwood One, United Stations, 18 years with the ABC radio network, and induction into the Radio Hall of Fame in 2000. Some of my most fun radio memories were hosting live shows at Disneyland and Disney World, from Times Square in New York on New Year's Eve, from the Motown Hitsville studio in Detroit and from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. I retired from broadcasting, hung up my headphones in January this year, and Cynthia and I are staying more than busy with family, friends, hobbies, and travel. In fact, we're in Santa Fe, New Mexico right now. Sorry I couldn't be there in person this evening to honor my esteemed WUVA colleague Wyatt Andrews and to celebrate 75 years of WUVA.
Well, now you know I asked Steve Taylor to do the intro. He's the Wolfman Jack of introductions, I would say, and I appreciate it. You know, Dick believes what he said about the value of working at the station, supercharging his career.